Sheikh Hamsi asked me to step up. This is not my week for the lecture. And what I wanted to say, since we are getting ready for one of the Academy Awards of Christendom, I thought it was most appropriate to delve into this lecture of Jesus Christ and him being the Messiah. He is called many names. Many names have been attributed to him. We will delve into some of that information today. The majority of this information can be found in the King James Version. These things are not made up. We have no particular beef with our Christian brothers, nor do we have a beef with our Muslim brothers, our Hindu brothers. We are all brothers in the Ram.
No.
With that, I give the disclaimer. Think not that we have come to usurp any of your religions. Ours is an altogether different world. And that's what we're expounding on. It is our duty to expose those things that go contrary, that try to oppress our people, that try to keep our people's minds in a certain way. It is our job to expose these things. Therefore, today's lesson is entitled The Messiahship of Jesus. Isim Leuli Mihiru Amin-Roh. What is a Pharisees? A Pharisees is a member of an ancient Jewish sect that was very strict in keeping to traditions and the laws of its religion. Pharisees. Since we now understand what a Pharisee is, let us now go to the Bible. Jesus was not the founder of Christianity. I'll say that again. Jesus was not the founder of Christianity, but was the founding of Christianity. Therefore, he did not establish it, nor did he find it. What is known as Christianity is in reality the creed of Raha. Over 8,000 years before Jesus, Moses, and Enoch, peace be upon them. Jesus had trouble with the Pharisees because he came to change their gods. Does that sound familiar? Mm-hmm. It sounds familiar when you introduce change. You automatically introduce opposition. That is the name of their God. Mark 15th chapter, 34th verse, and Matthew 27th chapter, 46th verse testifies to this changing of the name of God. When the Pharisees asked Jesus for a sign from heaven to prove to them that he was the Messiah of God, he said, "There shall be no sign given them but the sign of prophecy." For this information, go to Matthew 12th chapter, 29th verse, 40th verse. That as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the fish's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the hearts of the earth. crucified on a Friday and he rose on a Sunday. 3 days. Was it actually 3 days? I don't think so. The Roman Church says that Jesus was buried late on Friday. And the disciples of Jesus tell us that early on the first day of the week, he was already risen. That is, early the first day, the resurrection was in the past. Therefore, if both parties told the truth, then the sign which Jesus gave the Pharisees did not come to pass. For not nearly would he have been in the grave 3 days and 3 nights. There are many that try to efface, that is, rub out, the contradiction between the words of Jesus and the Roman tradition by saying Jesus meant only 1 day and 2 parts of the days, and thus they will not accept the words of Jesus as they would if anyone else had spoken them. If Jesus, as presumed, was crucified on Friday and rose according to Matthew chapter 28 in the end of the Sabbath or late on the Sabbath, and thus was already risen on the first day of the week, as Mark also says, then he would have been only 2 parts of 2 days in the tomb. What they're trying to do is make sense out of something that people have come along and accepted. 3 days in the tomb, according to what is being written. It did not measure up to that. It did not measure up to that, but yet still they want you to believe this fairy tale. He lived in the grave, or he was in the grave for 3 days and he rose and what have you. There would be a small portion of Friday, at most about 2 hours before sunset, and even the Sabbath would not be left whole. Why? Because in the Bible the days are not reckoned after the Roman style. From midnight to midnight, we today have right here in America 24 hours for a day. That is from midnight to midnight, which is none other than a Roman style from a Roman calendar and not in accordance with the Christian Bible. In the Bible, the days end with the setting of the sun, and therefore the Sabbath ended at the time which is now commonly called Saturday at sunset. This was a time when the 2 Marys went to the tomb. This information is found in Matthew 28th chapter, first verse. And Jesus was risen before they arrived. Notice this institution of the ordinance or rule of the supper fell already on the same day on which Jesus was betrayed and crucified and buried, because Bible days commence immediately after sunset. If we were to try to figure out all these things the way that these things are being taught, it is a confusing thing. He rose 3 days from the tomb. When did the Sabbath begin? Their particular calculations of Sabbath starts at the end of sunset. We do not see this. We are looking at our days, so to speak, our days, 24 hours in a day. The Greek word opsi, Matthews 28:1, signifies time late in the afternoon. At this point, we can see that the Roman tradition is running into conflict with the Hebrew calendar, which in turn brought about a contradiction between the Roman tradition and the words of Jesus according to the Christian Bible. Now, we have been inspired in understanding that the crucifixion of Jesus is none other than the Roman tradition, copied from what? The cult of Ra of Africa, which is yours. Let us return to the greatest story ever told. Where have we heard this before? The Bible is supposed to be the greatest story ever told. And what is a story? A story is a legend. And what is a legend? A legend is a lie. Let us return to the greatest story ever told. We will now unveil more of the Roman tradition, and we will deal with the crucifixion according to the Bible days, which is not reckoned after the Roman style. The day of the crucifixion was not a Friday, but a Wednesday. The 14th of the Jewish month, Nisan, was the day of the preparation for the Sabbath of unleavened bread. Exodus chapter 12, Lamentations chapter 23. On that day, Jesus was crucified and died. That day, according to the Bible rule, ended at sunset, immediately after Jesus was to have been buried. Then commenced the Passover Sabbath, which was observed in commemoration of the deliverance of the children of Israel from bondage and their flight out of Egypt in huts, in haste, when they were compelled to eat unleavened bread, according as it is written in Lamentations, 23rd chapter, 5th, 6th, and 7th verse, September the 14th. The 14th day of the first month is the Passover and the feast of the unleavened bread unto the Lord. 7 days ye must eat unleavened bread. In the first day ye shall have a holy convocation, that is, calling together. Ye shall do no serviceable work therein, no manner of working like a slave. Exodus 12th chapter, 16th verse. This takes place from September the 13th to September the 14th. The 13th of September, the day of preparation, which Jesus was betrayed and crucified, it was no feast Sabbath. It was a work day, and a very busy one, for it was preparation for the Passover Sabbath of unleavened bread, an annual Sabbath of the Old Covenant. So we find out that on this particular day, many things were going on this particular day. That they're saying how they worked all of these things into this particular day. Jesus was crucified, and he was resurrected, and he rose from the grave. The Bible does not say these things are accurate. What they do say is they were legends, they were lies told. Their day of judgment and justice, freedom of body, soul, and mind is celebrated September the 14th. The feast of the unleavened bread unto the Lord. To commemorate our escape from Christianity, we too eat unleavened bread to the Lord. September the 22nd, just 8 days later. If you look in our Holy Family Gospel and you look into ordinance and ceremonies, you'll find a date that is in tune with what we believe to be a truth in and around that day. If this Passover Sabbath had been the weekly Sabbath and not but an annual Sabbath, the priest never would have talked about arresting Jesus on it on account of the multitude that came in on that feast Sabbath. So they arrested him on the 13th, which was the preparation day, and hastened and led him and had him crucified the same day, which was Wednesday. And if the day following had been the weekly Sabbath and not just an annual feast Sabbath, they would not have gone on it to Pilate to negotiate for a watch to be so gone on it to Pilate to negotiate for a watch to station before the sepulchre. From the subject you are being taught is showing that the Jews under the Levitical dispensation has laws passed unto the Roman government for their protection. We say he was crucified on a Wednesday, eve of the Jews' holiday. Luke 23rd chapter, 56th verse says that after the women had prepared the spices to anoint Jesus, they rested on the Sabbath. It is this passage over which people stumble who do not read the Old Testament and know little about the old sacrificial laws and its Sabbath. They take as true that after Jesus' burial about sunset, the women had set time to prepare the ointment, and that the following day was the weekly Sabbath, or that the Passover Sabbath concluded with the weekly Sabbath, and that the first visit to the tomb was made Sunday morning. We're contradicting some of those things. But simply by laying the testimonies of Mark and Luke side by side, they would find that it is not so. In Mark 16th chapter, first verse, the testimony is given, which Luke omitted, namely, that the women brought the spices after the Sabbath of unleavened bread was passed. And Luke testified in chapter 23, verse 56, that the women rested on the Sabbath according to the commandments after they had prepared the spices and ordinances. Thus we see there were two Sabbaths, and that on both of them and during the day between them on which the women prepared the spices, Jesus lay in the grave. The woman brought the spices after the Sabbath was passed. This was the Sabbath of unleavened bread mentioned by Mark. And the second Sabbath was the day on which the women brought and prepared the spices, namely Friday, the 6th day of the week. The weekly Sabbath, therefore, was the 3rd day of Jesus' entombment. On this day, having prepared the ointment the day before, the women rested resurrected according to Luke. According to Luke, he was in the tomb 3 days and nights, and that the crucifixion was on a Wednesday. They said that he was crucified on a Friday. But the records indicate that he was not crucified on a Friday. He was crucified on a Wednesday. The day that followed the crucifixion was nowhere spoken of as the weekly Sabbath. John calls it a high day, and Matthew called it in one place the day that followed the preparation. Now, from the time of the resurrection, Matthew records the first visit to the tomb. He says, Opus Dei Celebratos, which means 2 women came to see the tomb. Matthew 28th chapter, first verse. Some say that opus signifies late, some in the end, and some after the Sabbath. But the next word, ye epit, isman sabahatu, tell it yet better, namely that it was at the drawing on or beginning or appearing on the first day of the week. In Luke 23:54, we have the same word, electricus. There the Sabbath, the Passover feast Sabbath, drew on. So we must now know that the women arrived at the tomb just when the Sabbath was past. The Christians cannot deny this, for it is their truth. The Roman tradition is false, for the crucifixion was on Wednesday, a day before the Jewish festival, which was on a Thursday. So we see now the Friday crucifixion, the Sunday rising from the dead, is nothing but a Roman tradition and not a reality at all. Psychology and you. What is psychology? It is putting in action a valuable thought. What is applied psychology? It is putting in action and giving power to a valuable thought. Psych. The word means soul. Therefore, psychology means study of the soul. What is a business? It is an organization of persons, not an office, nor a building. Why is it that business is not done in an office or a building? Because its success depends upon the selection and supervision of its personnel. The most influential person in the world are those who handle people. An understanding of human nature is essential or necessary. Psychology, or a study of the soul, is a most important science because it makes known the thoughts or manifests the actions of the mind within the soul, which direct the actions of the outer self and flesh. Knowledge of the soul unfolds the principle by which human or soul force may be guided, and human or soul forces may dominate the mechanical forces of nature, no matter how powerful. Because mechanical forces are those of persons who accept or reject a thing or a saying from a teacher, and etc. Let us give this example a study. man talk with each other, work with each other, or deal with each other, there they influence each other. And wherever men influence each other, there are problems in psychology. I agree or I do not agree. Those kinds of actions are to be studied with the utmost of care, that we may find the cause of agreement and disagreement. The center of interest in study of the soul on the part of the social world is in the prime movers of behavior, in the dynamos or morals of actions, in what causes people to act as they do, and in how they may be influenced to act in desired ways. All this depends upon the power that are applied to a given thought, where one must reflect completely or relax completely in this operation. We've been carrying on an exercise on Wednesday nights. In this exercise, trying to focus one's mind power, trying to strengthen one's mind power through concentration and meditation. We are trying to develop soul power, focus power. Soul power is fixing one's mind to a particular object and making it stiffened, so to speak. These prime or first-in-rank movers, drivers, desires, I want, whether they may be called, are the forces in social behavior. If the thought is in preparing for living by conversation, use your power of thoughts with them in family relationship and etc. Examples may be observed on the other hand. Never try changing the person's action at this point. We're talking about how to use psychology. We're talking about how to use applied psychology. We are talking about how to transmit a thought to someone else, a power that we have that has been dormant for so many thousands of years. The manner of handling this point involves the question of loyalty on the part of you. A housewife has a husband, or a lady has a friend who is unsatisfactory in many respects and very satisfactory in other aspects. She has some differences with him, and the question is, how shall the matter be discussed with him to arrive at a satisfactory solution? The psychological problem is, how shall the conversation be opened and carried on so as to lead to a desired outcome? See what this lesson is talking about? Have you noticed the difference how the lesson changed? The lesson changed drastically. The lesson changed from talking about Jesus and him rising from the grave to developing one's soul force and one's soul power, which is all tied in together. If the conversation by the wife is opened in a way that will result in him leaving, is giving power to the thought of him leaving, and he does, if it is opened another way, it will result in his staying and changing him, his attitude towards his responsibility. Let us now solve the whole problem. The everyday importance of understanding the study of the soul of ourselves and our fellow man is broadly recognized and definitely indicated by facts presented in this lecture. There you will find that numbers of men and women regard the statement, know thyself, as second in importance only to the golden rule in guiding human behavior. This lesson is about you and your fellow with work-a-day world of problems. And what could be more interesting? Folks are the most interesting things there are. One of the chief things you should acquire in a study of psychology or the soul is to learn to analyze in psychological terms the human situation within you and around you. These situations, as well as experiments in the laboratories, are your raw materials. The better you learn to analyze them, the better you will solve them. Our next lesson in psychology and you will be based upon the behavior relating to mating another psychological problem. Prepared by the Messiahship, and is to be considered personal and not to be shown to hostile idolaters or strangers to our cause or movement. Guard it well. Bisalam yasrak beni.
Bisalam yasrak beni.